The mid-July sun beat down on the sprawling, manicured lawns of the prestigious Oak Creek Country Club, a venue that practically reeked of generational wealth and desperate pretension. It was the site of the annual Montgomery family reunion, an event that had less to do with familial love and everything to do with a ruthless, unspoken competition of status, bank accounts, and carefully curated illusions. 200 members of the extended family were scattered across the velvet green grass, clutching crystal champagne flutes that sweated in the suffocating Georgian humidity. The air was thick with the smell of expensive, slow-roasted hickory barbecue and the even thicker stench of fake, sycophantic laughter. I stood near the edge of the grand stone patio, nursing a glass of iced sparkling water, perfectly content to remain a ghost in my own family's grand theatrical production. I wore a simple, unbranded charcoal linen suit, understated, comfortable, and deliberately unremarkable. To the Montgomery clan, I was Elias, the quiet, supposedly struggling cousin who worked some ambiguous computer job in the city. I was the family's designated cautionary tale, the baseline against which they measured their own bloated successes. The low hum of jazz floating from the live band was suddenly obliterated by the aggressive, deafening roar of a V8 engine. Heads snapped toward the club's grand circular driveway. Tires crunched arrogantly over the pristine white gravel. There it was. A brand new, customized Ferrari SF90 Stradale, painted in a violently bright, aggressive Marinello red that seemed to scream for attention. It glided to a halt directly in front of the marble steps of the clubhouse, entirely ignoring the valet stand. The butterfly doors swept upward like the wings of a mechanical, predatory bird, and out stepped my cousin, Braden. He was wearing designer sunglasses indoors, a silk shirt unbuttoned 3 buttons too deep, and a smirk that suggested he had personally invented gravity. But Braden was merely the prop. The true star of this performance was his mother, my Aunt Cassandra. Cassandra descended the patio stairs like a monarch greeting her peasants. She was a woman who wore her insecurity wrapped in ostentatious designer labels, dripping in heavy gold jewelry that clanked loudly with her every dramatic movement. She threw her arms open, her shrill, piercing voice cutting through the sultry summer air, demanding absolute silence from the 200 guests. "Everyone! Everyone! Gather around!" Cassandra shrieked, waving her diamond-encrusted fingers toward the glowing red sports car. "I want you all to look at what true Montgomery excellence looks like. Look at what my brilliant boy, my Braden, has achieved by his 25th birthday." A polite, envious murmur rippled through the crowd. Aunts, uncles, and second cousins flocked to the driveway like moths to a neon sign, practically drooling over the polished carbon fiber and the gleaming leather interior. Braden leaned against the hood, crossing his arms and soaking in the worship, looking every bit the pampered prince who had never worked a hard day in his life. "This," Cassandra proclaimed, her voice echoing off the brick facade of the clubhouse, "is the result of hustle. This is the result of financial literacy, superior genetics, and the unmatched drive of my son. He didn't settle. He didn't ask for handouts." I took a slow sip of my water. The sheer audacity of her lie was almost poetic. Everyone in the family knew Cassandra had remortgaged her own McMansion twice just to fund Braden's failed startups, but no one dared speak that truth aloud. In the Montgomery family, the illusion was sacred. Cassandra's eyes, cold and predatory, swept over the crowd of admirers. She was searching for something, or, more accurately, someone. Her gaze locked onto me, standing quietly in the shadows of the veranda. A wicked, venomous smile slowly spread across her heavily contoured face. The opportunity to elevate her son by crushing someone else was simply too delicious for her to pass up. She parted the sea of relatives, marching directly toward me, her high heels clicking sharply against the stone. The crowd parted, sensing the imminent bloodshed. They formed a tight, suffocating semicircle around us. The band stopped playing. The silence became absolute, heavy, and oppressive. "Elias, darling," Cassandra purred loudly, ensuring her voice carried to the very back rows of the crowd. "I noticed you parked your vehicle way out in the overflow dirt lot. I almost didn't recognize it. Is that the same little Honda Civic you've been driving since you dropped out of grad school 10 years ago?" A few of the younger cousins snickered. Braden chuckled from the driveway, adjusting his designer watch. "It gets me from point A to point B, Aunt Cassandra," I replied, my voice perfectly level, my heart rate steady at a calm 60 beats per minute. "Oh, sweetie, I'm sure it does," she mocked, placing a condescending hand on her chest. "But you know, at 32 years old, getting from point A to point B is just a polite way of saying you're stuck at the starting line. Look at Braden." She gestured grandly toward the Ferrari. "Braden is speeding into the future. He's manifesting wealth. He's a CEO." She paused, letting the silence stretch, twisting the knife. "And what are you, Elias? Still crunching numbers in some cubicle? Still renting that tiny apartment?" It absolutely breaks my heart to see my own blood fail so miserably to live up to the family name. She took a step closer, invading my personal space, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was still entirely audible to the breathless audience. "It's pathetic, Elias. It really is. You should ask Braden for a job. Maybe he'd let you wash the Ferrari on weekends. It would build you character." The entire patio erupted into cruel, sycophantic laughter. My own mother, standing near the buffet line, looked down at her shoes, too terrified of Cassandra's wrath to defend her only son. 160 pairs of eyes stared at me, waiting for me to break. They waited for my face to flush red with humiliation. They waited for me to stutter, to make an excuse, to shrink away into the shadows like the defeated loser they so desperately needed me to be. I didn't flush. I didn't stutter. I didn't even blink. I just stood there, looking deep into Aunt Cassandra's cruel, glittering eyes. The contrast between her frantic, desperate need for dominance and my absolute, unshakable stillness seemed to momentarily confuse her. The smirk on her face faltered for a fraction of a second as she realized she hadn't drawn any blood. I slowly reached into the inner pocket of my tailored suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was completely black, save for a single, silent notification. "Target acquired. ETA 2 minutes. Awaiting your final authorization." I didn't look angry. I didn't look hurt. I looked at Cassandra with the cold, detached pity of a god watching a termite build a castle out of sawdust. What my arrogant aunt and her golden child son did not know, what this entire miserable family did not know, was that I wasn't just an accountant in a cubicle. I was the silent, absolute majority shareholder of Vanguard Capital Acquisitions. And more importantly, I owned the predatory high-risk lending firm that had just foolishly approved Braden's desperate, completely fraudulent auto loan at a crippling 28% interest rate. I looked up from my phone, meeting Cassandra's gaze, and allowed a tiny, terrifyingly calm smile to grace my lips. "You're right, Aunt Cassandra," I said smoothly, my voice carrying a quiet, resonant authority that made the laughter in the crowd instantly die in their throats. "Braden's car is a phenomenal indicator of exactly where he stands financially. In fact, I think we are all about to get a very clear picture of his true net worth." Right on cue, the heavy, metallic rumble of 3 massive, commercial-grade tow trucks echoed from the end of the country club driveway. Let's freeze the frame right there. Imagine the exact moment those heavy, commercial-grade diesel engines roar over the soft jazz music. Picture the absolute, suffocating silence of 160 judgmental relatives as the reality of those flashing amber lights begins to wash over the pristine country club lawn. Look at the frozen, bewildered expression on Aunt Cassandra's heavily Botoxed face, perfectly preserved in a state of sudden, creeping dread. Before we press play on this scene, before I tell you exactly how I mathematically, legally, and publicly dismantled the illusion of my golden child cousin and completely shattered my family's toxic hierarchy in a single, devastating afternoon, I need to step out of the story for a second and talk directly to you. Because if you are feeling your heart rate pick up right now, if you felt a familiar, sickening knot in your stomach when Cassandra started her performative, cruel monologue in front of everyone, then you know exactly what it feels like to be the designated punching bag of your own bloodline. Before we go any further into the absolute carnage that is about to unfold on that manicured driveway, I want you to scroll down into the comments right now and let me know exactly where in the world you are watching from. We are building a global network of survivors here, and if you have ever had to sit quietly at a holiday dinner, a birthday party, or a family reunion while arrogant, delusional relatives mocked your progress, diminished your achievements, and treated you like a second-class citizen in your own family, hit that like button right now. If you have ever had to smile through the pain of being the family scapegoat just to keep the peace, and if you have ever dreamed of the day you could finally turn the tables and teach those toxic family members a lesson they will never, ever forget, then hit the subscribe button. Welcome home. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. Let's talk about the reality of the family scapegoat for a moment, because society rarely tells the truth about it. We are conditioned from birth to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, a sacred sanctuary of unconditional love and mutual support. We are spoon-fed this Hollywood narrative that your parents, your aunts, your siblings, and your cousins will always be your safest harbor in a storm. But for some of us, family isn't a harbor at all. It's a battlefield. In families like the Montgomerys, love isn't unconditional, it is transactional. It is a highly volatile currency doled out only to those who play their assigned roles perfectly. And every toxic family system requires two specific roles to function: the golden child and the scapegoat. The golden child, like my cousin Braden, is the illusion. They are the fragile, hollow vessel into which the family pours all their desperate hopes, their unresolved insecurities, and their unearned pride. The golden child can do no wrong. They can fail miserably, they can drain the family finances, they can be arrogant, lazy, and cruel, and the family will relentlessly cover it up. They will rewrite reality itself to protect the golden child's image. Because to admit the golden child is a failure is to admit that the family's entire legacy is a fraud. But to maintain that massive, exhausting lie, the family needs a counterweight. They need a dumping ground for all their collective anxiety, shame, and disappointment. That is where you and I come in. That is the scapegoat. The scapegoat is the truth teller of the family. And in a family built on lies, the truth teller is public enemy number one. If you are the scapegoat, you know the drill. You are the one who is actually doing the heavy lifting in silence. You are the one working the late shifts, paying your own bills, navigating life without a safety net, and building your foundation brick by agonizing brick. Yet somehow, you are always framed as the disappointment. You are the cautionary tale. Your quiet stability is weaponized against you, painted as a lack of ambition. Your independence is viewed as a threat because it means you cannot be controlled. They need you to be small, Elias. They need you to be struggling. Because if you are successful, if you are thriving, then what excuse does the golden child have? If the one they threw away manages to build an empire, it exposes the absolute bankruptcy of their entire belief system. So they peck at you. They deliver thousands of tiny paper-cut insults wrapped in passive-aggressive concern. Oh, you're still driving that old car? Oh, you're still living in that modest apartment? They do it in front of audiences, at weddings and reunions, because the cruelty is the point. They use your public humiliation as social glue to bind themselves together. For years, I bought into their narrative. I kept my head down. I wore the cheap suits, I parked in the dirt lots, and I swallowed my pride because I thought that being a good family member meant absorbing their poison so the family could survive. I thought endurance was a virtue. But endurance without boundaries isn't a virtue. It's self-sabotage. There comes a critical breaking point in the life of every scapegoat. It's a quiet, invisible moment where the final chain snaps. You wake up one day, you look at the people who share your DNA, and you realize with absolute freezing clarity, these people do not love me. They love the version of me that they can step on to make themselves feel taller. And once you see that truth, you can never unsee it. That is the moment the victim dies, and the architect of their ruin is born. That is the moment you stop playing their rigged game and decide to buy the entire casino instead. I didn't argue with Aunt Cassandra because lions do not waste their breath negotiating with hyenas. I didn't defend my career or my bank account because true power doesn't need to scream for attention like a bright red Ferrari on a borrowed dime. True power moves in absolute silence. It operates in the shadows, and when it finally strikes, it doesn't just leave a mark. It permanently reshapes the landscape. You are about to witness the exact moment a lifetime of silent, strategic moves converges into a single, inescapable trap. You are about to see what happens when the family punching bag turns out to be the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. So grab a drink, get comfortable, and remember, blood does not entitle anyone to your peace, your sanity, or your success. Let's unpause the scene. Let's watch the Montgomery Empire burn. To truly understand the absolute poetic devastation of what was about to happen on that sun-drenched country club driveway, you have to understand the architecture of the Montgomery family illusion. As the heavy rhythmic grinding of the tow truck's diesel engines grew louder, vibrating through the soles of my shoes, the fabric of time seemed to stretch and slow. I watched the color rapidly drain from Aunt Cassandra's perfectly contoured face, her smug, theatrical smile hardening into a mask of sudden, incomprehensible panic. In that fleeting fraction of a second, a lifetime of memories rushed through my mind, illuminating the dark, twisted psychology of the family I was about to legally and publicly dismantle. The Montgomery family did not run on love, loyalty, or mutual respect. It ran on a highly volatile, completely fabricated currency of status and public perception. We were a family rotting from the inside out, obsessed with painting the exterior of a collapsing house in the most expensive, glittering shades of gold. At the center of this toxic solar system was my Aunt Cassandra. She was the self-appointed matriarch, a woman who wielded guilt and manipulation like a master swordsman. She lived in a sprawling 6-bedroom McMansion in the most affluent zip code in the state, a house characterized by soaring, hollow drywall pillars, cheap imported marble floors that cracked under the winter cold, and a mortgage that was suffocatingly underwater. Cassandra believed that if you looked rich enough, reality would simply bend to accommodate the lie. And Braden was the undisputed golden child. From the moment he took his first breath, He was anointed as the savior of the Montgomery legacy, the chosen one, destined to bring unimaginable wealth and prestige to our name. Because of this fabricated prophecy, Braden was entirely insulated from the concept of consequence. I remember the Christmas we turned 16. The entire family had gathered in Cassandra's cavernous, echoing living room. The air smelled of cinnamon and expensive pine, though the underlying tension in the room was always thick enough to choke on. Braden, who had just managed to scrape by with a 1.8 GPA after being caught cheating on his final exams, was gifted a brand new, customized BMW. Cassandra had thrown a massive catered party in the driveway, practically weeping as she handed him the keys, loudly proclaiming to the neighbors that her brilliant boy deserved the safest, most luxurious ride because he was going places. I, on the other hand, had spent my entire sophomore year working weekends loading heavy bags of fertilizer at a local landscaping company, just to help my mother keep our electricity turned on. My mother, Sarah, was Cassandra's younger sister, and she lived her entire life terrified of Cassandra's shadow. My mother had internalized the family hierarchy so deeply that she actively participated in my degradation just to secure a crumb of Cassandra's approval. That same Christmas, while Braden was revving the engine of his German luxury sedan, my mother handed me a wrapped box containing a pack of generic white undershirts and a bus schedule. "It builds character, Elias," Cassandra had chimed in from across the room, sipping a mimosa. "You've always been our little workhorse. You need to learn the value of $1, unlike Braden, whose mind is meant for higher-level executive thinking." That was the dynamic. Braden was the executive, I was the workhorse. Braden was the asset, I was the liability. Over the next decade, this dynamic escalated into absolute, terrifying financial ruin for the rest of the family. Braden's higher-level executive thinking resulted in a string of spectacular, embarrassing failures. He dropped out of his expensive private university after 3 semesters because the professors stifled his creative genius. He then launched a series of startups, a crypto trading bot that wiped out Uncle Robert's retirement fund, a boutique fitness app that never made it past the wireframe stage, and a luxury drop-shipping business that resulted in a garage full of unsellable, defective watches. Every single time Braden failed, Cassandra swooped in to rewrite the narrative. It was never Braden's fault. The market wasn't ready for his vision. His partners had betrayed him. The economy had shifted unexpectedly. To maintain the illusion of the golden child, Cassandra began aggressively draining the family's collective resources. She pressured aunts, uncles, and my own mother into investing in Braden's delusions. "Family supports family," she would preach at Thanksgiving dinners, her eyes scanning the table like a hawk searching for weakness. "If you don't believe in Braden, you don't believe in the Montgomery legacy." And while they bled themselves dry to fund a fraud, I disappeared into the shadows. I leaned into my role as the scapegoat. I realized early on that their neglect was my greatest advantage. Because no one paid attention to me, no one saw what I was building. I didn't go to the flashy parties. I didn't buy the designer clothes with maxed out credit cards. I went to a state school on a full academic scholarship, working night shifts at a data analytics firm. I learned the cold, unforgiving mechanics of high-level finance. I learned how to read distressed debt, how to identify over-leveraged assets, and how to execute corporate acquisitions with the ruthless precision of a surgeon. While Braden was busy posting rented yachts on Instagram and calling himself an entrepreneur, I was quietly accumulating capital. At 26, I launched a boutique private equity firm. By 29, I had orchestrated the buyout of 3 mid-level logistics companies. By 31, My net worth had quietly surpassed the gross domestic product of a small island nation. I became the absolute majority shareholder of Vanguard Capital Acquisitions, a massive umbrella corporation that owned dozens of subsidiary financial institutions. I didn't buy flashy cars. I didn't buy mansions with hollow pillars. I bought power. I bought the systems that controlled the money. I wore my simple, unbranded charcoal linen suits, custom-tailored in Milan for $5,000 apiece, though my family thought they were off-the-rack clearance items, and I played the part of the struggling accountant perfectly. They needed me to be poor to make their debt-fueled lives feel rich. I was happy to provide the contrast because I knew the math. I knew that a house built on credit cards and lies would eventually collapse under its own weight. I just didn't expect them to hand me the detonator. 3 months before the family reunion, Vanguard Capital acquired a subsidiary called Apex Premier Lending. Apex was a high-risk, predatory auto financing firm. They were the absolute last resort for desperate people who wanted to look wealthy but had the credit scores of bankrupt teenagers. They specialized in high-interest, aggressively collateralized loans with zero margin for error. One Tuesday afternoon, while reviewing a quarterly risk assessment portfolio in my penthouse office overlooking the city, my chief financial officer flagged a particularly egregious, almost laughable auto loan application that had just been pushed through Apex. Applicant: Braden Montgomery. Vehicle: 2024 Ferrari SF90 Stradale. Listed: income $500,000 per year. CEO of Montgomery Holdings. Credit score 480. Cosigner: Cassandra Montgomery. Debt-to-income ratio 85%. Interest rate 28.5%. I stared at the glowing screen of my monitor for a full 5 minutes in absolute silence. The audacity was staggering. Braden had completely falsified his income, inventing a phantom corporation. Cassandra had co-signed the loan using the absolute last drops of equity in her heavily mortgaged house. They had signed a contract with a predatory lender they didn't realize was owned by my holding company, agreeing to a monthly payment that was mathematically impossible for them to meet. And worst of all, they had signed the specific iron-clad Apex Premier Clause, a microscopic section of the fine print that stated if the applicant's income was found to be fraudulent, the loan would default immediately, bypassing the standard 30-day grace period, resulting in immediate repossession of the asset. They had handed me the loaded gun, pointed it directly at their own facade, and practically begged me to pull the trigger. I didn't decline the loan. I personally approved it. I let Braden have his toy. I let Cassandra have her prop. I let them polish it, flaunt it, and drive it straight onto the pristine lawns of the Oak Creek Country Club so they could use it as a weapon to humiliate me in front of 160 people. I watched Cassandra sneer at me, completely unaware that the man she was mocking wasn't just a guest at the party. I was the architect of her impending ruin. I was the silent owner of the stage she was performing on. The low hum of the jazz band was completely dead now, replaced entirely by the mechanical roar of reality crashing the party. The flashback evaporated from my mind, pulling me sharply back to the present moment. The blinding amber strobe lights of the 3 massive tow trucks washed over the crowd, casting long, dramatic shadows across the manicured lawn. The heavy, reinforced steel bumpers of the lead truck stopped mere inches from the gleaming front grille of Braden's bright red Ferrari. The power flip was no longer a silent mechanism in the background. It had arrived, and it was about to be deafening. The immediate aftermath of the tow truck's arrival was a masterclass in suspended animation. Time itself seemed to thicken, turning the heavy, humid air of the Georgia summer into an invisible gel. 160 members of the Montgomery family were completely frozen, their crystal champagne flutes hovering inches from their lips, their forced, sycophantic smiles dying a sudden, agonizing death. The live jazz band, which had been softly playing a Cole Porter tune, had abruptly stopped, the trumpet player lowering his brass instrument with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. In the sudden, gaping vacuum of silence, the only sound was the aggressive, rhythmic chug, chug, chug of 3 heavy-duty diesel engines idling on the pristine white gravel of the Oak Creek Country Club driveway. The massive, reinforced steel grille of the lead Peterbilt tow truck was parked a mere 18 inches from the delicate, gleaming carbon fiber nose of Braden's violently red Ferrari. The visual contrast was cinematic and brutally poetic. On one side, the fragile, hyper-expensive Italian sports car, a symbol of desperate vanity and hollow status. On the other, the hulking, grease-stained monoliths of blue-collar reality, equipped with hydraulic lifts, thick steel chains, and unforgiving winch cables. The blinding amber strobe lights mounted on the cabs of the tow trucks swept across the grand, manicured lawn in relentless, rhythmic arcs. The golden beams washed over the faces of my relatives, illuminating their confusion, their dawning horror, and the sudden, sharp scent of expensive perfume mixing with the harsh, metallic tang of diesel exhaust. My cousin Braden, who only seconds ago had been leaning against the driver's side door with the manufactured arrogance of a Silicon Valley titan, recoiled as if the car's pristine paint job had suddenly caught fire. He stumbled backward, his designer sunglasses slipping down the bridge of his nose, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The illusion of his impenetrable cool evaporated instantly, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, over-leveraged 25-year-old boy who knew, deep in his hollow core, that his entire life was a house of cards. Aunt Cassandra, however, did not retreat. Her reaction was a violent, desperate surge of pure narcissistic defense. Her heavily contoured face, previously set in a mask of smug superiority as she belittled my existence, flushed a deep, blotchy crimson. The veins in her neck strained against her heavy gold necklaces. She genuinely believed that if she screamed loud enough, the fabric of reality would simply bend to accommodate her delusions. "What is the meaning of this?" Cassandra shrieked, her voice shattering the heavy silence like a thrown brick through a stained glass window. She marched directly into the path of the massive lead truck, holding her diamond-encrusted hands up in the air as if she were a traffic cop attempting to halt a speeding freight train. "Hey, you! You filthy, incompetent morons!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the tinted windshield of the Peterbilt. "You have exactly 5 seconds to put this rusted piece of garbage in reverse and get off this private property before I have you all arrested for trespassing. Do you have any idea who we are? Do you have any idea how much money is standing on this lawn right now?" The hydraulic brakes of the lead truck hissed, releasing a sharp cloud of compressed air. The driver's side door swung open with a heavy metallic groan. Out stepped a man who looked like he chewed gravel for breakfast. He was a massive, imposing figure, wearing heavy steel-toed boots, stained denim, and a high-visibility safety vest stretched tight over a barrel chest. He held a thick metal clipboard in his massive hands. He did not look intimidated by the sprawling Georgian architecture of the clubhouse. He did not care about the sea of designer suits and expensive silk dresses staring at him. He was a man who trafficked exclusively in hard, undeniable facts, and he was completely immune to Cassandra's performance. He calmly slammed the heavy truck door shut, adjusted his mirrored sunglasses, and walked to the front of his rig, looking down at the Ferrari with professional indifference. "I don't care if you're the Queen of England, lady," the driver rumbled, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that easily carried across the silent patio. He consulted his clipboard, flipping past a heavily stamped cover sheet. I have a court-authorized expedited seizure order for a 2024 Ferrari SF90 Stradale, VIN, ending in 884 Delta. I'm looking for the primary signatory, a Mr. Braden Montgomery. Either hand over the electronic fob, or I drag this overpriced Italian lawn ornament onto the flatbed with the winch. Your choice. You've got 2 minutes. A collective, synchronized gasp rippled through the crowd of 160 relatives. Uncle Robert, the family patriarch who had invested heavily in Braden's failed crypto venture, dropped his plate of slow-roasted barbecue. It shattered against the flagstone patio, sending a thick splash of red sauce across his polished Italian loafers. My own mother, standing near the buffet, covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. Cassandra's jaw unhinged. The sheer, unadulterated disrespect of a blue-collar worker speaking to her with such authority short-circuited her brain. Seizure order? She practically spat the words, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. You are out of your miserable mind. My son is a CEO. He bought this car in cash. It is paid for. This is a mistake. You have the wrong address, the wrong car, and the wrong family, you absolute peasant. I am calling the police. I am calling the country club manager, and I am going to make sure you never work in this state again. She frantically dug into her expensive Hermes handbag, pulling out her phone with shaking, manic hands. Braden, meanwhile, was slowly backing away, trying to blend into the crowd of relatives, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit gates. He knew. He knew the cash story was a lie. He knew exactly why the trucks were here. This was the exact moment I chose to move. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show a single ounce of anger, vindictiveness, or malice. I simply stepped out from the shadows of the veranda and began to walk down the sweeping marble staircase toward the driveway. Every step I took was deliberate, slow, and measured. The sound of my leather dress shoes clicking against the marble echoed loudly in the stunned silence of the country club. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my hands relaxed at my sides, my expression a mask of absolute, terrifying calm. I was no longer Elias the scapegoat. I was Elias the architect, stepping onto the stage to tear down the scenery. As I walked through the crowd, the sea of relatives parted for me. They moved back instinctively, practically tripping over themselves to get out of my way, suddenly sensing a shift in the atmospheric pressure. The quiet, boring cousin they had mocked for a decade was suddenly radiating a gravitational pull so immense it felt suffocating. I reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped onto the white gravel, the crunch of the stone sounding like breaking glass. I walked past my trembling, hyperventilating aunt. I walked past the gleaming, soon-to-be-confiscated Ferrari. I walked directly up to the massive, imposing tow truck driver. Cassandra whirled around, her eyes wide with frantic, displaced rage. Elias! What are you doing? Get away from him! Don't you dare speak to this trash! Go find the club manager immediately! I ignored her completely. I stopped 2 feet in front of the driver, looking up at him. The driver looked down at me. He scanned my unbranded, bespoke charcoal suit. He noticed the absolute stillness in my posture. Then he looked down at the top sheet of his clipboard, the master authorization file that contained the digital signature of the holding company's ultimate authority. The driver's demeanor shifted instantly. The hostile, defensive posture vanished. He stood up a little straighter, squared his shoulders, and offered a short, deeply respectful nod. Mr. Chairman, the driver said, his gravelly voice dropping to a tone of absolute professional deference. We secured the perimeter. We're ready for your final green light to execute the asset retrieval. The words hung in the humid air like a detonated bomb. Mr. Chairman. Behind me, the collective breathing of the Montgomery family simply stopped. The silence became so absolute, so profoundly heavy, that I could hear the gentle hum of the Ferrari's internal cooling fans winding down. Thank you, Marcus, I replied smoothly, my voice calm, resonant, and effortlessly carrying across the entire lawn. You and your team made excellent time. I appreciate the efficiency. Of course, sir. Apex Premier Protocol demands an immediate response window, Marcus replied, handing the heavy metal clipboard directly to me. I took the clipboard. I slowly turned around to face my family. Cassandra was frozen in a grotesque pose, her phone half raised to her ear, her mouth hanging open. Her eyes darted wildly between me, the massive tow truck driver, and the clipboard in my hands. Her brain was violently rejecting the data it was receiving. It was like watching a computer system crash and reboot in real time. What? What is he talking about? Cassandra stammered, her shrill voice reduced to a dry, hollow whisper. Elias, what did he just call you? Why is he handing you that? I looked at her. I didn't gloat. I didn't sneer. I looked at her with the cold, clinical detachment of a forensic accountant reviewing a bankrupt ledger. He is handing me the final authorization paperwork, Aunt Cassandra, I said, my voice cutting through the heat like a sharpened icicle. Because as the majority shareholder and acting chairman of Vanguard Capital Acquisitions, I am the supreme governing authority over Apex Premier Lending, which means, to put it in terms you might finally understand, I own the bank that holds the title to your son's car. I let the silence stretch for 3 excruciating seconds, allowing the sheer magnitude of the statement to crush the air out of her lungs. A cash purchase, I continued, taking a slow step forward, my eyes locked onto hers. That is a fascinating narrative. A CEO? Another brilliant piece of fiction. Let's look at the actual math, shall we? I flipped open the heavy metal cover of the clipboard. I didn't need to read the numbers. I had memorized them in my penthouse office weeks ago. But the visual prop was essential for the psychological execution. According to this legally binding, electronically signed contract, I projected my voice, ensuring that Uncle Robert, Cousin Stephanie, and every other relative who had poured their life savings into Braden's delusions could hear every single syllable clearly. Braden Montgomery applied for a subprime, high-risk auto loan 3 months ago. He listed his income at $500,000 a year as the CEO of a company called Montgomery Holdings, a corporate entity that, according to the state tax board, does not exist, has never existed, and generates $0 in revenue. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. Uncle Robert took a threatening step forward, his face turning purple as he glared at Braden, who was now visibly trembling, sweating profusely in his expensive silk shirt. Furthermore, I continued, pacing slowly in front of the Ferrari like a prosecuting attorney delivering a closing argument. Braden's actual, verified credit score is a catastrophic 480. No legitimate financial institution on the planet would lend him the money to buy a used bicycle, let alone a $500,000 exotic sports car. He was rejected by 14 different lenders before he found his way to the absolute bottom of the barrel. Apex Premier Lending. I stopped pacing and turned my full, unblinking attention back to Cassandra. She was shaking now, a violent, full-body tremor. The heavy gold jewelry around her neck clanked together, betraying her terror. And how, you might ask, did a 25-year-old with no income, a fake company and a ruined credit score secure this vehicle? I asked the crowd, my voice laced with dark, dangerous velvet. I looked directly at Cassandra. He needed a cosigner. He needed someone willing to leverage their entire existence to fund his illusion. I took another step toward her, closing the distance, invading her space just as she had invaded mine 10 minutes earlier. But while she had done it with frantic, shrill desperation, I did it with the unstoppable, crushing weight of a glacier. You co-signed the loan, Cassandra, I stated, the volume of my voice dropping yet perfectly audible. You leveraged the remaining microscopic sliver of equity in your McMansion. You signed a contract with an interest rate of 28.5%, a monthly payment of $14,000, a payment you missed exactly 32 days ago. Shut up! Cassandra suddenly shrieked, a desperate, animalistic sound tearing from her throat. She lunged forward, raising her hand as if to slap the clipboard out of my grasp. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. Marcus, the massive tow truck driver, immediately stepped forward, his massive hand instinctively reaching for his heavy-duty radio. But I simply raised a single finger, stopping him in his tracks. Cassandra froze inches from my face. She looked into my eyes and saw something she had never seen before. Absolute, terrifying dominance. She saw a man who could completely erase her existence with a single phone call. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, and her raised hand slowly, agonizingly dropped to her side. You signed the Apex Premier Clause, Aunt Cassandra, I whispered, leaning in just slightly, ensuring only she and Braden could hear the final, lethal mechanism of my trap. It's buried on page 42, a fraud contingency. It stipulates that if the primary applicant is found to have falsified their income or employment status, the loan does not enter a standard default process. It is immediately classified as a fraudulent acquisition. The entire balance becomes due instantly. The 30-day grace period is legally voided, and the asset is subjected to immediate, unannounced repossession. I stepped back, addressing the entire crowd once more. There was no hustle. There was no financial literacy. There is no CEO, I declared, my voice ringing out with finality, shattering the Montgomery family mythos forever. There is only a spoiled, arrogant child playing dress-up and a desperate, deeply insecure mother who just bankrupted herself to buy him the costume. I turned my back on them, dismissing them from my reality. I looked at Marcus and handed him the clipboard. The paperwork is verified, I said clearly. Execute the order. Take it. Yes, Mr. Chairman. Marcus smiled, a grim, satisfied expression. He keyed his radio. All right, boys, hook it up. Zero drag, full lift. Let's get this plastic toy out of here. The hydraulic winches screamed to life. The heavy steel hooks were expertly maneuvered under the fragile carbon fiber undercarriage of the Ferrari. Within seconds, the front end of the $500,000 car was violently jerked into the air, the expensive tires leaving the white gravel. No, stop! You can't do this! Braden, do something! Elias, please! Cassandra wailed, her entire facade completely disintegrating. She fell to her knees on the sharp gravel, her designer dress tearing, her heavy makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks as the reality of her total, absolute ruin finally set in. Braden didn't move. He just stood there, weeping silently, watching the symbol of his fake superiority being unceremoniously chained to a rusty flatbed truck. The relatives didn't rush to comfort her. Instead, the crowd erupted into absolute chaos. Uncle Robert began screaming at Braden, demanding to know where his $50,000 investment was. My mother stood completely paralyzed, realizing that the son she had allowed to be treated like garbage was, in fact, the most powerful man she had ever known. The beautiful, pristine country club lawn had been transformed into a war zone of shattered egos, exposed lies, and devastating financial truths. And in the center of the hurricane, I remained, perfectly, beautifully still. The power had flipped. The scapegoat had become the king. And the execution was flawless. The sound of the hydraulic winch shrieking into high gear was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. It was a harsh, grinding, deeply mechanical noise that aggressively violated the pristine, manufactured elegance of the Oak Creek Country Club. The heavy forged steel chains tightened with a violent clank, biting hard into the reinforced transport hooks hidden beneath the Ferrari's delicate carbon fiber undercarriage. As Marcus engaged the primary lift, the front end of the $500,000 Italian sports car was abruptly, violently jerked toward the sky. The wide, expensive Pirelli tires separated from the white gravel of the driveway, spinning lazily in the humid afternoon air. The vehicle, which only moments ago had been worshipped as a religious artifact of the Montgomery family's superiority, now looked pathetically helpless, dangling like a caught fish at the end of a blue-collar hook. Cassandra was a catastrophic mess. She remained collapsed on the sharp, jagged gravel, her custom-tailored emerald green silk dress snagged and tearing at the knees. The heavy theatrical makeup that she used as war paint was dissolving under a flood of panicked, humiliated tears, leaving stark, ugly black streaks of mascara running down her flushed cheeks. She reached out with trembling, diamond-encrusted fingers toward the rising car, her mouth opening in a silent scream before a ragged, guttural sob tore its way out of her throat. "No, no, no, please!" she wailed, the sound entirely stripped of its former aristocratic pretension. It was the raw, primal sound of an ego being fundamentally and permanently shattered. "Brayden, tell them it's a mistake! Do something!" But Brayden could do nothing. The CEO of Montgomery Holdings, the brilliant prodigy meant for higher-level executive thinking, was completely paralyzed. He stood rooted to the spot, his expensive silk shirt stained dark with sweat under the armpits, his face the color of spoiled milk. He couldn't even look his mother in the eye. He just stared blankly at the spinning tires of the car he had never truly owned, his bottom lip trembling like a frightened child caught in a lie. The true vengeance, however, was not the physical removal of the car. The car was just a piece of metal. The true, absolute vengeance was the psychological and social destruction occurring within the semicircle of 160 stunned relatives. For decades, this family had operated under a strict, unspoken, mafia-like code of silence regarding Cassandra's finances. They had all willingly suspended their disbelief, ignoring the glaring red flags, because proximity to her perceived wealth made them feel important. But now, I had forcefully ripped the curtain away, exposing the grotesque, rotting machinery operating behind the stage. The illusion was dead, and in its absence, a cold, vicious reality rushed in to fill the vacuum. The sycophantic admiration of the crowd evaporated, instantly replaced by a terrifying, predatory anger. Uncle Robert, the family patriarch who had always treated me with thinly veiled contempt, suddenly broke rank. His face, usually a mask of jovial country club complacency, was now contorted in absolute purple-faced fury. He marched forward, his heavy leather loafers crunching aggressively against the gravel, stopping just inches from where Brayden stood shivering. "Brayden!" Robert growled, his voice trembling with a barely contained rage that echoed across the silent patio. "If you do not have a company, if you have no income, where in the absolute hell is the $50,000 I wired you last November for the crypto arbitrage bot? You told me it was locked in a high-yield escrow account. Braden flinched, instinctively taking a step backward, raising his hands in a pathetic, defensive gesture. Uncle Robert, please, The market fluctuated. There were unexpected developmental costs. The developers in Ukraine—
Shut your mouth!
Robert roared, a fleck of spit flying from his lips and landing on Braden's cheek. He turned his furious gaze down toward Cassandra, who was still kneeling in the dirt. You vouched for him, Cassandra. You sat at my Thanksgiving table, drank my wine, and swore on our mother's grave that his algorithm was infallible. You told me it was a guaranteed 30% return. I stepped forward. My hands casually slipped into the pockets of my tailored trousers, projecting the calm, serene aura of a tour guide walking a group through a museum of failures. There was no algorithm, Robert, I stated, my voice smooth, even, and effortlessly cutting through the tension. There were no developers in Ukraine. If you were to audit his personal accounts, which I took the liberty of having my forensic team do, purely for risk assessment purposes, of course, you would find that your $50,000 was distributed between luxury rental agencies in Miami, VIP table service at 3 different nightclubs, and the non-refundable down payment required to secure this exact Ferrari. The collective gasp from the crowd was sharp enough to suck the oxygen out of the air. "You liar!" shrieked Aunt Beatrice, stepping out from the crowd. She was a retired school teacher who lived on a fixed pension, and her face was contorted in absolute devastation. "You told me you needed $20,000 for server space. You told me I would be an angel investor. You stole my retirement, you little monster." The dominoes were falling with magnificent, catastrophic speed. The crowd, once a loyal court of admirers, transformed instantly into a mob of angry, defrauded creditors. They began shouting, pointing fingers, demanding their money back, their voices blending into a chaotic chorus of betrayal and financial panic. Cassandra, realizing the mob was turning on her, scrambled to her feet. She looked like a cornered, rabid animal. She tried to reassert her dominance, her eyes flashing with a desperate, unhinged light. "Stop it! All of you, shut up!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "We are Montgomerys. We do not air our grievances in public like common trash. I will repay every single cent. I have equity. I have the house. My property alone is worth $2 million. I let out a soft, dry chuckle. The sound was quiet, but in the heat of the moment, it acted like a splash of liquid nitrogen, instantly freezing the chaos. All eyes snapped back to me. "The house, Cassandra?" I asked, raising a single skeptical eyebrow. "Are you referring to the 6-bedroom estate on Willow Creek Drive?" "Yes, you smug, ungrateful little wretch! The house!" she spat, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "That is genuinely fascinating," I replied, tilting my head slightly. Because, again, as the chairman of Vanguard Capital, I have access to a very comprehensive view of the regional debt landscape. My analysts flagged your property files when you applied to co-sign this auto loan. You remortgaged that house 3 times, Cassandra. You stripped out every single cent of equity to fund Braden's boutique fitness app 3 years ago. Then, you took out a high-risk HELOC loan at 12% interest to cover your spiraling credit card debt. I paused, letting the silence stretch, ensuring every single member of the family was hanging on my every word. You are currently underwater on that property by approximately $400,000. I delivered the final, fatal blow with surgical precision. You don't own that house, Cassandra. The bank owns it, and given your current debt-to-income ratio, they will be foreclosing on it before the leaves change color this autumn. Cassandra's legs gave out. She didn't kneel this time. She simply collapsed backward, landing heavily on the manicured grass at the edge of the driveway, staring blankly up at the sky. Her mind had finally broken. The impenetrable fortress of lies she had spent 30 years building had been completely vaporized in less than 5 minutes, as if the universe itself had decided to participate in the poetry of her ruin. The heavy, double oak doors of the country club swung open. Out marched Mr. Sterling, the general manager of the Oak Creek Country Club. He was a notoriously strict, impeccably dressed man who tolerated zero nonsense from his members. He was flanked by 2 burly security guards in dark suits. Cassandra saw him, and a momentary, delusional spark of hope flickered in her dead eyes. She pushed herself up onto her elbows. "Sterling! Thank God! Arrest this man! Arrest the tow truck driver! They are ruining my family reunion! Have them thrown off the premises immediately!" Mr. Sterling did not look at me. He did not look at the tow truck. He marched directly up to Cassandra, his face set in a mask of absolute professional disgust. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with the club's crest. "Mrs. Montgomery," Sterling said, his voice dripping with aristocratic disdain, "I have not come to assist you. I have come to deliver this formally, in person, as our electronic communications have apparently been ignored." He dropped the envelope onto the grass next to her. "This is a formal notice of the immediate termination of your membership at the Oak Creek Country Club," Sterling announced, speaking loudly enough for the entire ruined family to hear. "You are currently 6 months in arrears on your membership dues, totaling over $18,000. Furthermore, the credit card you provided to the catering department this morning to fund this event has been declined for insufficient funds. You are currently trespassing. You and your guests have exactly 15 minutes to vacate the premises before I have the local authorities forcefully remove you for theft of services." It was an absolute, flawless, and devastating checkmate. Financial ruin, social ruin, complete public humiliation. The holy trinity of vengeance, delivered on a silver platter. The family erupted into a frantic, panicked frenzy. Aunts and uncles abandoned their plates of unpaid barbecue, practically sprinting toward the overflow dirt lot to get to their cars, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of Cassandra's collapse. They didn't offer to help her up. They didn't offer to pay the catering bill. They abandoned her with the exact same ruthless, self-serving speed they had used to worship her when she was on top. Through the chaos, I saw a figure slowly walking toward me. It was my mother, Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe, terror, and a sudden, sickening realization. For 32 years, she had allowed me to be the sacrificial lamb of this family. She had stood by in silence while Cassandra mocked my clothes, my career, and my life, too terrified of losing her sister's conditional approval to defend her own son. She stopped a few feet away from me, wringing her hands nervously. She looked at my custom suit, noticing for the very first time the flawless stitching and the expensive fabric. She looked at the absolute, untouchable power radiating from my posture. "Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling, attempting to summon a maternal warmth that she had never truly earned. "Elias, honey, I had no idea. You own a bank? You're a chairman? Why didn't you ever tell me? We could have been..." I looked down at the woman who gave birth to me. I felt no anger. I felt no sadness. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, liberating emptiness. "We could have been what, Sarah?" I asked, using her first name, severing the maternal cord with a single word. "A family? You had 32 years to be a family. You had 32 years to defend me when they called me a failure, a workhorse, a pathetic joke. You chose your side. You chose the illusion. You chose them. Please, Elias. A tear slipped down her cheek. I'm your mother. I can leave them. I can come with you. No, I replied, my voice as hard and unforgiving as a diamond. You cannot. Because you only want the man standing in front of you right now. You never wanted the boy in the cheap suit who rode the bus. You made your bed in the shadows of Cassandra's lies. Now, you get to sleep in the ruins. I turned my back on her without waiting for a reply. I looked toward the driveway. Marcus and his crew had fully secured the Ferrari onto the heavy steel flatbed of the massive Peterbilt. The chains were locked, the winch was silenced, and the flashing amber strobe lights were painting the chaotic, fleeing crowd in rhythmic bursts of golden reality. Marcus gave me a sharp, two-finger salute from the cab of the truck. I offered a slight nod in return. With a deafening blast of compressed air and the heavy roar of a diesel engine, the tow truck pulled forward, its massive tires crunching over the white gravel, carrying the bright red symbol of my family's toxic delusion out of the country club gates and out of my life forever. I stood there in the humid afternoon air, the scent of expensive hydrangeas mixing with the sharp smell of diesel exhaust, and for the first time in my entire existence, I took a deep, unrestricted breath. The sound of my mother weeping was a sound I had been conditioned to fear for my entire life. For 32 years, Sarah's tears were the ultimate manipulative weapon, a guilt-inducing mechanism designed to keep me tethered to my role as the family workhorse. But as I turned my back on her, the sound no longer carried any weight. It didn't pierce my heart. It didn't trigger that familiar, suffocating knot of anxiety in my stomach. It simply washed over me, as hollow and meaningless as the wind rustling through the expensive, imported hydrangeas lining the country club patio. I didn't look back. That was the most crucial, defining physical movement of my entire existence. The act of not turning around. Every step I took away from the shattered, chaotic epicenter of the Montgomery family felt like I was physically snapping heavy, rusted iron chains that had been wrapped around my chest since childhood. I walked away from the frantic, screaming mob of aunts and uncles who were currently tearing each other apart over vanished investments and exposed lies. I walked away from my cousin Braden, the fallen golden child, who was currently sitting on the sharp white gravel, staring with dead, vacant eyes at the empty space where his rented identity used to be parked. I walked away from Aunt Cassandra, who was still kneeling in the dirt, her face streaked with ruined makeup, desperately trying to negotiate with a country club manager who looked at her like she was a stain on the bottom of his shoe. And I walked away from the woman who had birthed me. A woman who had willingly sacrificed her son on the altar of her sister's delusional vanity. The air, which had been thick, humid, and deeply oppressive all afternoon, suddenly felt incredibly light. The suffocating tension of the family reunion, the forced smiles, the passive-aggressive jabs, the desperate posturing, had completely evaporated, blown away by the harsh, violent blast of absolute truth. I continued my walk down the sweeping circular driveway. I didn't rush. I didn't jog. I moved with the slow, deliberate, unhurried cadence of a man who owns his time, his space, and his entire destiny. The white gravel crunched rhythmically beneath the leather soles of my bespoke Italian shoes. With every step, the frantic, shrill screaming of my relatives grew fainter, blending into the ambient background noise of the cicadas humming in the massive, ancient oak trees that bordered the Oak Creek estate. For years, Cassandra had mocked my modest life. She had ridiculed my unbranded clothes, my quiet demeanor, and the fact that I parked my car in the overflowed dirt lot at the far edge of the property. What her arrogant, superficial mind could never comprehend was the philosophy of true power. Stealth wealth is not about hiding. It is about insulation. When you build an empire of unimaginable scale, you do not need to wear a billboard to prove it. You do not need a violently red, financed sports car to scream for attention. True wealth operates in the shadows. It is quiet. It is absolute. And most importantly, it is completely untouchable by parasites. I bypassed the overflow dirt lot entirely. I didn't have a rusted Honda Civic waiting for me there. That was simply another prop in the grand illusion I had maintained for their benefit. Instead, I walked toward the heavy wrought iron main gates of the country club, situated at the end of a long oak-lined avenue. Standing quietly in the dappled shade of the massive trees, completely separated from the vulgar display of wealth on the main lawn, was a vehicle that represented the exact antithesis of Braden's repossessed toy. It was a customized, armor-plated Rolls-Royce Phantom 8, painted in a bespoke, fathomless shade of midnight black that seemed to absorb the late afternoon sunlight rather than reflect it. It had no flashy aftermarket rims, no loud exhaust system, and no garish racing stripes. It was a monolith of engineering, a silent, rolling fortress of unimaginable luxury and lethal, understated power. It cost more than Cassandra's heavily mortgaged McMansion and Braden's fake Ferrari combined. Paid for entirely in cash, registered to a shell corporation and legally untouchable. Standing beside the rear passenger door was Thomas, my personal head of security and driver. Thomas was a former SAS operative, a man carved out of granite, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit with a discreet earpiece coiled behind his ear. He had been monitoring the entire situation from a safe distance, ready to intervene at a moment's notice. But he knew exactly how I preferred to handle my business. As I approached, Thomas stood perfectly straight, offering a sharp, respectful nod. He didn't ask questions about the screaming echoing from the clubhouse behind me. He didn't comment on the 3 heavy-duty tow trucks that had just rumbled past him, carrying a screaming red sports car. "Everything executed to your satisfaction, Mr. Chairman?" Thomas asked, his voice a low, calm rumble that immediately grounded me in my actual reality. "Flawlessly, Thomas," I replied, a genuine, relaxed smile finally touching my lips. "The portfolio has been successfully audited. We have liquidated all toxic assets. I believe we are completely finished here." "Excellent news, sir," Thomas said, reaching out to grasp the heavy, polished silver handle of the Phantom's rear door. He pulled it open. The door didn't just swing, it glided on perfectly engineered, silent hinges. It was like opening the door to a bank vault. I paused for one final second before stepping inside. I turned around, looking back up the long, tree-lined avenue toward the grand stone clubhouse in the distance. From this vantage point, the Montgomery family looked exactly as they truly were, incredibly small. The grand, sweeping patio was a stage of absolute chaos. I could see the tiny, distant figures of my aunts and uncles practically shoving each other out of the way to get to their cars, desperate to flee the infectious disease of Cassandra's bankruptcy. I could see the country club security guards physically stepping toward Cassandra, who was still waving her arms frantically, completely unhinged, screaming at a sky that simply did not care. They were tearing themselves apart. The family that had bonded over my humiliation was now devouring itself in my absence. Without the scapegoat to absorb their poison, they had no choice but to swallow it themselves. I looked at my mother, standing entirely alone on the edge of the lawn. The family she had chosen over me had abandoned her in the blink of an eye. She was clutching her purse to her chest, looking lost, broken, and utterly isolated. I felt a profound, chilling sense of closure. The scales of justice had not just been balanced. They had been obliterated. I turned back to the Rolls-Royce and stepped into the cavernous rear cabin. Thomas closed the heavy door behind me with a solid, definitive thud. The instant the door latched, the outside world simply ceased to exist. The acoustic engineering of the Phantom was absolute. The screaming, the crying, the crunching of gravel, it was all completely eradicated, replaced by a deep, profound, and utterly flawless silence. The air inside the cabin was perfectly climate-controlled, carrying the rich, intoxicating scent of hand-stitched leather and polished mahogany woodwork. I sank back into the deep, plush seating, feeling the tension finally drain from my muscles. My customized dashboard screen glowed to life, displaying real-time analytics from Vanguard Capital's global markets, a silent testament to the empire I had built with my own 2 hands, in the dark, while they were busy playing dress-up. Thomas slid into the driver's seat, the thick glass partition separating us lowering silently. "Where to, sir?" he asked, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. "Back to the penthouse or straight to the airfield? The private jet is fueled and prepped for the London acquisition meeting." "The airfield, Thomas," I said, leaning my head back against the impossibly soft headrest. "Let's leave the past where it belongs. We have an empire to run." "Very good, sir." The massive V12 engine roared to life, but inside the cabin it was nothing more than a distant, powerful whisper. The Rolls-Royce pulled smoothly away from the curb, gliding down the road with the effortless grace of a ghost ship on black water. I looked out the tinted, bulletproof window. The setting Georgian sun cast long, golden shadows across the pavement. I watched the Oak Creek Country Club gates slip past, disappearing into the distance. I watched the physical manifestation of my childhood trauma, my years of silent suffering, and the toxic people who had tried to break me, shrink away into the rearview mirror until they were nothing more than a microscopic blur. And then, as we turned onto the open highway, they vanished completely. For the first time in 32 years, my mind was perfectly clear. My soul was untethered. I was a man who had walked through the fire, allowed it to burn away the dead wood of a toxic family, and emerged as an absolute, untouchable titan. The road ahead was wide open, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, and I was entirely, beautifully free. The transition from the suffocating, humid air of the Georgia summer into the absolute, hermetically sealed sanctuary of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was nothing short of a spiritual baptism. As Thomas navigated the massive, midnight black vehicle onto the interstate, I poured myself a single, precise measure of Macallan 25 from the crystal decanter housed in the rear console. The amber liquid burned a slow, satisfying trail down my throat, a physical manifestation of the absolute victory I had just orchestrated. I leaned my head against the impossibly soft, hand-stitched leather headrest and watched the world blur past the tinted, bulletproof glass. In my mind's eye, I could still see the flawless, catastrophic geometry of their ruin. I could see the flashing amber strobe lights of the tow trucks painting the manicured lawns of the Oak Creek Country Club. I could see Cassandra's ruined, tear-streaked face as she realized her $2 million McMansion was about to be seized by the very nephew she had spent 3 decades treating like dirt. I could see Braden, the hollow, useless golden child, staring into the absolute void of his own manufactured existence, stripped of the single prop that gave him value. And I could see my mother, standing alone in the wreckage, realizing too late that she had backed the wrong horse and sacrificed her only son for a seat at a table that was currently burning to the ground. By tomorrow morning, the fallout would be absolute. The police would have escorted them off the country club property for trespassing and theft of services. The frantic, furious phone calls from aunts and uncles demanding their stolen investment money back would drown out whatever pitiful excuses Cassandra tried to invent. The bank would initiate the foreclosure process on her home. Braden would be facing potential fraud charges for falsifying a loan application across state lines. And I would be at 30,000 feet, flying over the Atlantic in a Gulfstream G650ER, reviewing the final acquisition papers for a multi-billion-dollar European logistics merger. The contrast was not just poetic. It was the ultimate, undeniable proof of a universal law. When you build your life on a foundation of cruel, arrogant lies, gravity will eventually, inevitably, come to collect its debt. And when you build your life in silence, fueled by discipline, resilience, and an unbreakable sense of self-worth, you become the gravity. We arrived at the private airfield just as the sun dipped completely below the horizon, painting the sky in deep, bruised shades of violet and indigo. The heavy iron gates parted for the Rolls-Royce without a single word exchanged. Thomas drove directly onto the tarmac, pulling the Phantom to a smooth halt mere feet from the sleek, silver fuselage of my jet. The twin Rolls-Royce BR725 engines were already whining with a low, powerful hum, ready to tear through the atmosphere. I stepped out onto the tarmac. The smell of jet fuel and the cool, crisp night air hit my lungs. I didn't look back toward the city skyline. I didn't spare a single thought for the people who shared my DNA, but never shared my soul. I walked up the illuminated air stairs, stepped into the soft ambient lighting of the cabin, and took my seat. As the jet accelerated down the runway, pressing me back into the upholstery with the raw, undeniable force of millions of dollars in mechanical thrust, I looked down at the shrinking lights of Atlanta. Down there, in one of those tiny, insignificant grids of light, a family was tearing itself apart. Up here, in the quiet sanctuary of the stratosphere, a Titan was finally at peace. Let's freeze the frame right there. Let the jet disappear into the clouds, and let's bring the focus back to you and me. Because if you have listened to this story and felt your heart pounding in your chest, if you felt a deep, resonant surge of adrenaline when those tow trucks arrived, and if you felt a profound sense of catharsis when I finally walked away from my mother, then you are not just a viewer. You are a survivor. And I am speaking directly to you. Society, movies, and culture have spent centuries force-feeding us a highly toxic, incredibly dangerous lie. They tell us that family is everything. They tell us that blood is thicker than water. They weaponize these hollow platitudes to convince you that you are morally obligated to endure endless disrespect, psychological manipulation, and emotional abuse simply because you share a genetic sequence with your abusers. Let me be absolutely, unequivocally clear. Blood does not equal a blank check. Sharing DNA with someone does not grant them a lifetime, unlimited subscription to your peace of mind, your financial resources, your energy, or your soul. The title of mother, father, sister, or brother is not a get-out-of-jail-free card for toxic, destructive behavior. Respect is the universal currency of all human relationships, and if they cannot afford to pay you in respect, then you must bankrupt their access to your life. If you are the scapegoat of your family, I know exactly what you are carrying. I know the exhausting, invisible weight of always being the one who has to be the bigger person. I know the quiet devastation of sitting at a holiday table, watching the people who are supposed to protect you actively try to dismantle your self-esteem just to make themselves feel taller. I know the paralyzing guilt that hits you when you finally consider drawing a boundary, because you have been conditioned since birth to believe that setting a boundary is an act of betrayal. It is not a betrayal. Setting ruthless, unbreakable boundaries against toxic family members is the ultimate act of self-preservation. It is an act of profound self-love. The most powerful weapon the toxic family system possesses is the illusion that you need them. They need you to feel small. They need you to feel dependent. Because the moment you realize your own power, the entire system collapses. The golden child's fragility is exposed. The narcissistic parents lose their primary source of emotional supply, and the entire house of cards comes crashing down. If you are currently trapped in this dynamic, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not argue with them. Do not try to defend your choices. Do not waste your precious breath trying to convince a room full of committed, intentional blind people to see your worth. Lions do not negotiate with hyenas. Instead, you must embrace the silence. You must lean into the shadows they forced you into, and you must use the dark to build your empire. Educate yourself. Work the late hours. Save your money. Cultivate your mind. Build a fortress of independence so massive, so structurally sound, that their petty insults and manipulative tactics bounce off it like pebbles against a titanium wall. And when the day comes, and it will come, when they suddenly realize that the workhorse they mocked is now the owner of the track, do not offer them a hand up. Do not let them reap the harvest they actively tried to burn. You let them starve. You let them face the absolute, crushing reality of their own incompetence. You owe them nothing. You are not required to set yourself on fire simply to keep toxic people warm. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you, and sometimes the only way to win the game is to completely flip the board, walk out of the casino, and buy the bank. I want to build an army of people who refuse to be victims of their bloodlines. I want to build a community of titans who have chosen their own peace over the chaotic theater of family dysfunction. If this story resonated with you, if you felt the power of the slow walk away, I need you to go down into the comments right now and claim your space. Share your stories of resilience. Have you ever had to look a toxic parent or an arrogant sibling in the eye and permanently sever the cord? How did it feel when you finally took your power back? Your story is a weapon of light, and sharing it in the comments below might be the exact spark someone else needs to finally break their own chains today. Hit that like button to signal to the algorithm that we are taking our power back. Subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, and join a global network of independent, unbreakable people who know their worth and refuse to settle for anything less than absolute respect. Never apologize for protecting your peace. Never fund someone else's delusion. And never forget that the most beautiful, devastating revenge in the world is massive, undeniable success. Stay strong. Stay silent. Build your empire. I'll see you in the next video.